Hello again. First of all, I should let you know I got a fun new piece of gym equipment, so I may be a little bouncy in today's video. I was asking a couple different friends what might be valuable for a mindset video, and one of them was telling me, I forget exactly how she worded it, but something along the lines of moving from the idea of a failed experience being, failure to a learning experience. And that just made me kind of think of, yes, growth mindset. Kind of that's the whole idea of these mindset videos, but specifically, have I even defined that? Because that's kind of my overarching philosophy of life, I would say. I think I've mentioned before I was a classroom teacher I've been in education for about 15 years, and I taught high school for 6 years and junior high, middle school for about 6 years, taught different languages, and it's so interesting to me because when it comes to students and when it comes to young people and when it comes to traditional academic settings, I never doubted that a student could learn, grow, and improve. And particularly that, for example, a student who was willing to apply effort and work hard, even if they started from a weaker point, could get further than a student who maybe came in with natural aptitude for learning Spanish. I was a Spanish teacher. Maybe they're like really a natural at learning languages, but they don't work hard. The student who maybe struggles more but works harder can surpass the natural talent. I've seen over and over again in my career, and I never doubted that when it came to young people. But I have found, interestingly, that in my own life, I have not always given myself that grace of a growth mindset. And I think it's so important that we kind of investigate that because you can have a growth mindset in one area of your life, and then you can fail to have that same growth mindset in another area. So let's talk about growth mindset today. First, I want to define it, give you a little bit of background on the topic, and talk a bit about neuroplasticity and the research behind growth mindset, and then just give you some examples that tie into what we're talking about, which is sustainable, healthy lifestyle. And I'll give you two examples. One will have to do with exercise, and one will have to do with food. And there will be a blog post to go along with this one. So first, let's define these concepts. Growth mindset. Maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. There's actually another term as well, fixed mindset. So let's talk about fixed mindset first, and then growth mindset kind of goes along with that. So about 30 years ago, there was a researcher, she's now a Stanford professor, named Carol Dweck. She's the one who coined these terms, fixed mindset, growth mindset. And she got very interested. She's in psychology and mindset and personality research. And she and her colleagues got really interested in what it was that differentiated students who persevered in the face of challenge from those who kind of just gave up, even when it was a relatively easy challenge, but they were just struggling. So what was the difference between those students? And a lot of it had to do with their mindset, they found. So fixed mindset, Dweck defined as people believing that their basic qualities, like their intelligence especially, or their talents, are simply fixed traits. So they kind of spend their time documenting their intelligence or talent instead of developing it. So these are like the kids who kind of go to school and they say things like, oh, I'm not good at math, or oh, I'm terrible at learning languages. Whatever that sort of like fixed idea of your talent is, or like, so-and-so is a smart kid, but I'm not as smart as so-and-so. Sort of this idea that your intelligence or your IQ is at a certain level and is a fixed trait that cannot be changed. And then on the other side of the coin are the kids with growth mindset. And the kids with growth mindset believe that their most basic abilities can be developed through dedication and hard work, and that brains and talent are just the starting point. And of course, this view is much more conducive to creating resilience and grit in students, and maybe is better for developing a lifelong love of learning and a sense that you can grow and change and develop skills over time. So personally, I think the latter, the growth mindset, is much more valuable to cultivate in students, especially, and then I think in ourselves as well, even as adults, depending on what area of our lives we're wanting to improve. So, Carol Dweck. She actually has a great TED Talk you can look up. I'll link it below, called, I think it's called The Power of Yet. Or she talks about the power of yet and how this one school in, I think it was Chicago, when a student was not successful, instead of giving them like a C or a D or an F, they gave them the grade not yet. And how there's so much power in that idea of not yet, because it's not this black and white, succeed, fail, capable, incapable. It's like you're on this spectrum, you're on this journey, and just not yet, but what could you do to keep developing, which is such a shift. And it's interesting because this isn't just something that, she was curious about as an educator or as a psychiatrist and is just kind of like an anecdotal feel-good concept. There's also scientific research behind it, particularly in the field of neuroscience. So it used to be believed quite a while ago that, actually maybe even up till fairly recently, that especially as adults, our skills and our talents and our abilities were kind of fixed past a certain point. In fact, in my field, in the field of language teaching, there are a lot of misconceptions, both within the field and from others looking at the field of learning languages, that if you don't learn a language when you're really young, like before puberty or ideally before the age of 10 even or something, that it's like impossible to learn a language, or it's much, much harder to learn a language. And it's much more complicated than that. There's a lot of research on that. But suffice it to say, we have a lot of fixed mindsets as adults about when and where our talent and developed abilities kind of stop being able to develop and grow. And that's a shame, because neuroscience has uncovered that, in fact, the brain can and does adapt like plastic, which is what we call neuroplasticity over time. So if you kind of think of the brain as like a road map, and there's different routes and paths going different places, basically the well-traveled paths on the map, the ones that kind of stand out are habits. They're the paths that we travel over and over again, whether good or bad. They're the routes that come easily without even thinking about them. But we can carve out new paths. And as we carve out those new paths, just like if we were carving a path through a field of grass, at first it's very, a dim little path, but the more you walk it, the more it becomes an established path. The wider it gets, the more the path that you're no longer traveling weakens and gets overgrown. So pathways in our brain are the same. They can weaken with disuse, they can strengthen with use. We can carve completely new paths, and that's neuroplasticity in action. So that is very possible at any age. And in fact, not only knowing that on the one hand, but then practicing that is increasingly in the research as something that staves off dementia and Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and those kinds of neurodegenerative diseases that progress over time. So also something to be aware of. So what does this have to do with healthy lifestyle? Of course, like, it's one thing to be a kid in a classroom who's 11 years old trying to learn Spanish, and to have your teacher tell you, actually, it doesn't matter if you're a natural at learning Spanish. You can work really hard and you will get better. I think that's, seems fairly logical, fairly black and white. But what about for us? What about if you're, 35 and you have a couple kids and you're just trying to get through your life and be healthy, but you're struggling with it? What does growth mindset potentially have to offer you? I think a lot, because I think that the difference between that fixed mindset and that growth mindset is kind of everything. It's very subtle, but it's a shift that really can change your outlook, and then your outlook changes your perception, and your perception is really your reality when it comes down to it. So let's get a little bit more concrete, a couple of examples. So let's say first, an example with exercise. So maybe you're lifting weights and you literally fail, like you're on your last set of back squats. You have a barbell on your shoulders, you squat down and you realize it's like your last rep, your last set, and you cannot get the bar back up and you have to fail and the bar falls off your back. It's kind of scary. Your body has failed you. Literally, you could not complete that set. Or, whatever it is. Maybe it's not a back squat. Maybe it's a body weight squat and your legs are shaking and you just can't get back up. Whatever the move is. A fixed mindset would probably say something like, that's it. That's the limit of my abilities. That's all I can do. I'm just not very strong. And that's kind of it. Whereas a growth mindset might suggest something like, today, this is the best I can do. I wonder why that is. And I wonder how I could prepare differently for a future workout and maybe a different outcome next time. For example, maybe I didn't sleep well last night. If I didn't sleep well, why not? Could I wind down earlier? Maybe have a little less screen time? Was I hydrated going into this workout? Maybe I need to hydrate more. What did I eat before this workout, if anything? Did it work for me? Was it fueling me? Was it not? And you could tweak any of those variables or all of them in different ways and see what your outcomes are. And that mindset is a growth mindset that you can change, you can improve, you can see where different self-experimentation takes you over time. It's not and also maybe even it is more simple, like this was all I could do today, but even that's the today is like the not yet, right? Like we're not going to improve every day. If we improved every day, then we'd be back squatting thousands of pounds. It doesn't happen every time, but to say like, maybe your goal is to get to this weight and it's only here today, and to say like today that's the best I can do, that's like the not yet. That's okay. Some weeks I'm going to maintain, some weeks I'm going to be weaker. And then, growth is not linear. Sometimes it's going to be 2 steps back, 1 step forward, 2 steps back, but then suddenly 5 steps forward and then 4 steps back. And that's okay. That's all part of the journey. So it's subtle, but it's a big deal, I think. It's the difference between giving up and knowing you can keep going. And that's huge with your lifelong journey with health. To take another example related to food, this is one I think a lot of people struggle with. Perhaps you are committed to following a new way of eating, whatever it is. You want to add more vegetables, or you're trying to stay hydrated and drink less, or cut out sugar, or maybe it's even more structured than that. Maybe you're going paleo or keto or vegan or whatever it is, or intuitive eating or something that's not even a label. Good for you. And you're really excited about it. You're pretty committed to it. You've been going strong for about a week. You've noticed your sleep is better. Your energy seems more boosted. Your outlook is just kind of getting more positive and sunny. You're feeling good about it. And then the weekend comes and you relax a little bit. You enjoy some quality time with your partner or some friends or family. You have a couple drinks. Somebody orders pizza and you have a slice or two. And sure enough, by Sunday evening, the Sunday blues have kicked in. You have a little bit of regret or shame or even self-loathing if it gets to that level, which it doesn't need to, but let's say it does. And you are maybe kind of like in that shame cycle that's then causing you to think ahead and maybe like overcorrect in the opposite direction, thinking through like, okay, well, this week I'm gonna not do anything off plan, and I'm gonna work out even harder, and I can like work off those calories or whatever it is to get back to even keel or like make up for it or something like that. Well, what's likely to happen if you keep doing that? You're probably going to keep course correcting. The harder you overcompensate, the harder you fall off the next weekend. And like 3 months later, you've just yo-yo dieted again for like 3 more months, and your metabolism is all confused and you feel even more shame and guilt as you keep not following through with your own commitment to yourself and not feeling like you're not showing up for yourself. So in that case, with the food stuff, maybe a fixed mindset would say, I'm just not good at sticking to healthy eating. I'm frustrated that I always mess up and it can't stay consistent. I give up. It's not worth it. And people do this all the time, right? They fall off the wagon. Maybe it goes, they just can't stick to it. And then 6 months later, when the shame and guilt and the discomfort in their own skin kicks in, then they're back and they're, too far back. They do too much all at once, and then again they fall off, and then a year later, and it's just this like terrible cycle. So a growth mindset might instead gently suggest, you know what, I did a great job last week with my new way of eating. I was committed to my plan for 5 days. And yeah, maybe I fell off this weekend, but I can just literally start again with my next thing I put in my mouth. And maybe next time I can go 6 days. And maybe it's not even falling off. Maybe that's balance. Maybe having a drink with my friends makes me feel a little bit of psychological and physical relief, and then I feel recommitted, but not in an overcompensatory way, just in a, oh yeah, that was fun, and that's also feeding me in a different way. So, you might, with a growth mindset, think something more along the lines of, I did a great job last week with this new way of eating. I felt and I slept better. I know I can learn to do anything I want. In this case, I want to learn how to eat more healthily and in a more sustainable way. Weekends seem to be a little bit more challenging for me, but I know that my effort and attitude make a big difference in my outcomes. Failure, quote unquote, failure, I'm doing finger quotes, is another opportunity to grow. I'm going to say that again. Failure is just another opportunity to grow. That's all it is. How can I reflect on this weekend to set maybe one small goal for the week ahead? So notice that with both of those, whether it was the exercise, with the failing, but then like re-perceiving, tweaking how you approach it, or the food with the falling off, quote unquote, or getting back on plan, whatever it is, both of them, the fixed mindset is pretty brief and black and white thinking, whereas the growth mindset is this much more nuanced, much more living in the gray, in between, like you're in the journey. It's not an end destination. It's an ongoing growth journey that you're on. And it really reframes the challenge as not like this insurmountable thing, but as this like challenge that you want to engage in, that you can get stronger. So I think that again it's subtle, but it's a big deal, because as some takeaways here, we can have that growth mindset sometimes maybe with our children, or for me with my students, but we don't always have it for ourselves, or maybe we have it in one area of our lives, like we have a great growth mindset professionally at the office, we're killing it, but then maybe personally with our healthy habits, we really beat up on ourselves and have a fixed mindset about what we're capable of accomplishing long term. I definitely struggled with that. Like I said, I always had a growth mindset with my students, but not so much with me. And I gave up on myself so easily. And it's so funny looking back over the last couple of years that I've really been trying to transfer my growth mindset from teaching and the classroom to just me and my personal life and my healthy habits. A couple of things that stand out to me that I've accomplished that I never thought I could do. One is being able to do a bodyweight chin-up. I remember around January of 2019, so about a year and a half ago, I really wanted to get a bodyweight chin-up, and I just, told myself the story I had always told myself, which was that's not possible. I'm just never going to be strong enough to do a chin-up. And then it was funny, there was like some little voice in the back of my head that was like, but I wonder like what it would take. Like I used to be able to do chin-ups when I was a little kid, when I was in gymnastics. Why couldn't I do them now? And sure enough, when I learned more and when I found a program to strengthen, I had set this goal as like my January monthly goal. And I thought it would take me months and months. I would have to extend the goal. And in fact, I was able to do a bodyweight chin-up by January 14th. It was crazy. And it really challenged my thinking. Same thing dietarily. Grains have not worked well for me for a number of years, but I would often, go for a while gluten-free and then kind of fall off and have stuff that didn't work for me and feel really bad and then go back again. And one of my trigger foods was pizza. And I just remember thinking like, life is not worth it if you can't eat pizza. I could never give up pizza. I could never. You hear that all the time, right? Turned out all I had to do was research and find a way to make pizza that worked for me and my digestion, and I found a great way, and it's actually more delicious to me than traditional pizza. So you can overcome anything. You really can. You just maybe need the knowledge, maybe need to research, maybe need to be patient with yourself, and maybe need to practice, just like anything. Whenever we start something new and it's a new skill, we're going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to be awkward, it's going to be icky, but then when we keep doing it, that pathway gets a little bit more defined. That neuroplasticity starts kicking in, and like 3 or 4 or 5 times in, it starts feeling comfortable. And then after it feels comfortable, it feels easy. And then after it feels easy, it just becomes an automatic habit. And you can do this with anything. Just like you can accidentally fall into the habit of always walking in the door from work and grabbing a beer or a glass of wine, you can also stop strengthening that pathway, and instead you can walk in the door and the first thing you do is change into your tennis shoes and walk back out the door for a walk, and then come in and drink a bottle of water. So you can do anything you want to do. You just have to believe that you can do anything. And that is a growth mindset. I will definitely be talking more about this. I think, it's one thing to kind of understand what a growth mindset is and to learn the basics of it, like in this video. And then I think there's so much more when it comes to the practicality of applying a growth mindset in different areas of our life. So I will be back when it comes to growth mindset. And I think there are many, many things we could dive into. Some ideas I have include talking about how I kind of do like my monthly goal setting and my weekly planning, because if you really don't have like an action plan for like each day, week, and month, then even if you have a growth mindset, what are you progressing towards? What do you want to grow with, and how do you ensure you're actually progressing? So that's one thing I think could be an interesting video, or if this becomes a podcast episode. There are so many things. So if you have ideas too, don't hesitate to let me know. And that goes for anything with this mindset series. And it doesn't have to be mindset. Last week talked about caffeine. So really anything that you just think is interesting regarding sustainable, healthy lifestyle, let me know and I will go there. Hope you have a great week. This week, maybe challenge yourself a couple times. Maybe when you catch yourself telling yourself a story about like, oh, I always do this, or I can't do that, or I never, whatever it is, try to catch yourself and maybe replace it with that word yet. Like, I didn't do this, whatever it is, yet. And then with that yet, maybe give yourself a little grace. How could I? Get curious, start wondering, and maybe set one small goal that would help you move in that direction. Thanks for listening.